So what are you optimistic about in 2019? Pretty simple question, but when put to 46 of the country's most powerful CEOs, as the AFR's Chanticleer column did, the answers were pretty enlightening. Yeah, specifically looking at the comments of the big four banks, I thought that one stood out to be unlike the rest. CBA, ANZ and Westpac bosses all referenced the challenges or issues or the Royal Commission directly. This is of this year. But NAB boss Andrew Thorburn was much less contrite, saying that he's optimistic because the need of Australians to borrow money is not going anywhere. It's an interesting point. For tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Claire Kimball, founder of The Squiz, and Greg Baxter, partner at Newgate Communications. So, this Chanticleer column, it put it out there, 46 CEOs, what are you optimistic about in 2019? I think, when looking at the banks, it kind of came back a bit more interesting than I was expecting, because one of them didn't really look like the others. So, I guess the question is, when in the public sphere, is it always best to apologise first? You know, before doing anything else. Claire, what do you think? Your bar of interesting is a lot lower than mine. Yes, true. But it's been a big year for banks. Come on,
look, I've been out of the corporate comms game now for a couple of years, and I was just struck, Baxter's right in it, but I was struck by the wall of corporatees, just the lack of connection. I think the retail, Alison Watkins, I thought was a good example. She actually can talk to people who, just show up and buy stuff. But the banks and the miners, it's just like blah, 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 yada, yada, yada type of thing. And you guys, were working so hard to bring these stories to life and to tell great stories in a really, digestible way. But, God, they make it hard. Yeah, as you guys are. And it's exactly what The Squiz is all about. Because there's so much of that out there, isn't there? And there's so many great stories. But, gee, that corporately. And, you're giving people a gift. Tell us, just a nice reason to be optimistic, and it's like a wall of, oh my God, But it felt like 3 of the 4 banks were speaking the same language, and then one was saying something totally different. Greg, did you kind of...
I think you're being very harsh.
Am I? Okay, fair enough.
I mean, I think Andrew Thorburn has apologised to the point where he should stop apologising.
Okay.
And I think that's true of all of them. But to Claire's point, the only one that cut through for me of those 46 was the CEO of Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, Marnie Baker, I think her name is.
Yeah.
And she had a great saying. She said something about, the purpose of a bank is to feed prosperity, not feed off it. And that was sort of just a simple, clear statement in English. I mean, the rest of them were talking about growth and wealth and disruption and technology. They
get the odd mention of staff.
Occasionally.
There's a lot of
mostly. So they were talking about things like competence and capability, right? When they were talking about people, they weren't talking about people as people. They weren't talking about integrity or fairness or any of those things that really go to the big question. The big corporate question of 2019 is all about trust. So competence and capability and performance. Very little to do with trust. It's all those other things. And that's where when I looked at that survey, I was really surprised at how almost none of them, with 1 or 2 exceptions, addressed that broader philosophical question, which has been front and centre in the business community and in politics, for that matter, and in the media all year.
So is that kind of what you would say to them, is that it's better to just hit that straight on and go, I'm looking forward in 2019 to regaining the trust?
Well, I think speak English would be the first thing that we'd say to them, right? Because there was a lot of corporatese and jargon in what they said. I felt that without being critical of the Financial Review, the question was, what are you optimistic about in your sector, right? So a CEO is going to answer that question and stay away from all of those other sort of philosophical issues.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
The bigger question, I think, is business is the main source of prosperity in Australia, and yet the business community does a very poor job of explaining that to the population. That, to me, is the big question. What are they going to do about that?
And Greg, I thought it was interesting, Jennifer Westcott's answer as well. I'm probably going to verbal her. She said that despite all of the political uncertainty, business kind of keeps going, and it doesn't kind of keep going. There's a lot of people working really, really hard to provide jobs, to provide wealth, to provide prosperity, to actually do what it takes
to make sure that our great country keeps going, and it doesn't just keep going, but it's all lost in communication. I don't think these people
I was struck by that too.
really explaining it.
There was an earlier segment on Your Money today talking about someone saying that you might see the rise of ethical investing coming through in 2019 as a much bigger force, because maybe 2018 has been that turning point of this is actually going to be where dollars are going to be spent now, because you can't trust them to do it themselves and do the right thing. Like, people are actually going to be putting money in the right direction where companies are absolutely doing the right thing and kind of nailing into their business model, not just, their corporate speak.
And the big debate, which has already started, is are we, as company directors, are we here to look after the shareholders, which legally they are, or are we here to look after a much broader constituency, i.e. the broader community? And you'll hear directors arguing that they have no legal obligation to do that, but they have plenty of pressure legally to look after shareholders. I think the fact is the law needs to change. Companies have to be obliged legally to look after all those constituencies. And at the moment, it's really only the shareholders that they technically have to provide for.
And in a more practical sense too, they're not going to have profits if they don't have customers, and customers are getting really interested in this stuff.
Speaking of the kind of language that we saw in that list of 46, I mean, would you see that kind of language just drop directly into the ASX filings of some of these companies? Do they have a real problem speaking to different parts of Australia?
Sadly, I think the filings in those official releases are worse. And, there's, again...
Maybe because it is so legalistic, those particular documents.
Well, there's a lot of people, having drafted, and Claire and I have both drafted many of these documents over many years.
Shared ones, I think, in the...
Oh, really? Oh, we didn't know that.
Over the years.
They're in the Powerhouse Museum.
Those ones.
If we ran a business, it'd be...
Yeah, that's it.
You draft something and you say, well, that's beautiful. And then it goes to the lawyers and the auditors and the accountants and the CFO and the company secretary, and then the CEO finally gets to look at it, and by that time it looks like a doily.
Spunk
There's
left
nothing left, right? That's how it happens.
So you're still up against that, I imagine, in your line of work?
Yeah, look, it is tough. But I think that companies are starting to realise that kind of obfuscatory language is not just not just below par, but it's becoming a real negative.
Yeah, it's seriously like smelly.
And captured. They're so captured in their own, talk about a camera bubble.
This is why we love, on this show, we get to talk to startup and entrepreneurs. They're so connected to the very essence of why they're doing it and what they're doing. They're so passionate. I think it must be hard.
And they can tell their story very simply, those people. We see them on this program all the time.
It's their absolute passion, their heart. But, I guess by the time you're the CEO of a top 200 company, you're pretty far from where it all began. And, the metrics you just talked about, it's...
But leadership and connection is key, I think, whether it's politics or business. And those ones that are doing it well are doing okay. The ones that aren't are failing badly. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, leadership and connection, because it brings us quite nicely to our next point.
Nice.
Thank you, Claire.
That's a pleasure.
When it comes to reputation, Aussies trust Ronald McDonald more than the big banks. That's not actually a joke. This is on the back of a recent set of numbers, a recent survey. The list of Australia's most reputable companies looks very different this year compared to last year. Banks took an absolute battering. CBA fell 21 spots to 57th on the list, while Ronald McDonald House Charities jumped 12 spots. So it kind of got us asking, is reputation more fluid than previously thought? Can you ruin it very quickly, and can you rebuild it more quickly than we previously thought? Greg, what do you think? Well, it takes a long time to build and not very long to lose. So that's still the case? That's still true? I think so. I mean, the thing with the charities, the charities were in a bit of trouble not that long ago, say 4 or 5 years ago. There were a couple of bad apples that sort of seemed to spoil the rest of the basket for a little while. People were uncertain about what was really happening to their money, and I think there's been a lot of change. They've had to work hard. They've had to work hard, and what this survey probably bears that out to some extent. And they do, as we were just talking about the broader social purpose of business. I mean, charities clearly understand that. I mean, that is their business, the broader social purpose. And businesses, they're gaining trust, and of course, business is losing trust. So I'm not surprised that
almost all of those charities came out. The lowest ranked charity was still higher than the highest ranked company.
Yeah, I did think it was interesting that, I mean, because from a few years ago, we used to do a program called Social Business. At the time when they were kind of bringing the Charities Commission, like, they had big problems of people trusting them with money for all the money that was wasted, and so they've actually gone through quite a repair process in the last few years, which made, you know, maybe that big corporates can actually learn a thing or two from charities.
Well, what was interesting about that survey, there were, I think, 3 or 4 car makers, but not Holden or Ford. The 3 or 4 retailers, but not Coles or Woolworths, for example. There were no telcos, there were no mining companies, there was no Amazon, there was no Google. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
Interesting. But
It's a challenging time, isn't it, for big business? Just innately, I think we're getting a lot more cynical with big political parties, big business, all of that. And I think, though, in the charity sector, they're always going to get the benefit of the doubt. We've just been through a Royal Commission on Child Abuse. A lot of charities are involved in that. Their names have been slung around for some pretty horrendous things. The Aged Care Royal Commission coming up will be a similar exercise. But their brands somehow seem to be able to get past that. Some of those things are historical, some are quite current, but I think there is a general sense that we're willing to say, you know, but they do good work, and, you know, most of the people there are in a way that we wouldn't with business or with politicians.
Yeah, maybe only in the past, but not now, that's for sure. Now, did you all know that swearing is good for you?
Yes.
Let me explain, for those who didn't know that. Studies have shown that swearing can actually raise your heart rate, which then helps to reduce the pain. For example, one study found that people who held their hand in an icy cup of water while swearing lasted 50% longer than the people who used neutral words like wooden or flat. So, is it time we embrace a good curse, especially in the workplace, where maybe is the last domain of where swearing is kind of acceptable? Claire?
Well, I worked in political offices, as you know, for a long time. Language there can get quite colourful. Interesting, I only worked for bosses that didn't swear a lot, and I think that was quite good because you just don't want to get caught in a moment, as some of them do.
But then you're all more anxious, you're not as healthy, according to this research.
Maybe there's a private outlet, I don't know. Exercise actually seemed to be their thing. They, you know, would hit things or run stupid distances or, you know, swim terribly
Well, they could have just been swearing their heads off in the office.
Could have just been swearing their heads
off. A whole
off.
lot better for them.
Yeah. I'm not much of a swearer. I think you take my quota.
Well, this survey said the
and that
average...
of others.
Well, yeah, you two work together, so you are...
Well, we have. I've worked for many years in this building. There's a lot of swearing in this building.
Okay.
Newsrooms.
Like you guys, a lot of newsrooms in this building, as you know. So
I don't think we swear 5 times an hour each.
That's a lot.
This research
I'm not
recommends.
saying this newsroom. I'm saying the ones upstairs.
Do they swear more than 5 times an hour? Oh.
But I don't think it's relaxed. I think they're still crazy up there.
Yeah.
But what seems to happen every few years is we recalibrate what is and what is not anymore a swear word. So, I mean, you see a bit of changing and chopping and changing here. So, I mean, you know, are we likely to...
Still not acceptable on TV, really.
We're not going to go there. I'm not about to ask the question
of the key words we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not going to try and do the big hits until we cross the line.
I didn't need the warning. Greg, on the other hand.
Well, one thing this research says, what people who swear more are more genuine and sincere, is our perception. Do you go with that?
Absolutely.
I can tell Greg's a big swearer.
I use it to effect. Like, because I use it so sparingly, when I do use it, it is very...
So you don't find it's to reduce pain or anxiety?
No,
it's just to get
relaxed,
Yeah, you do seem quite a relaxed
Well, there's a lot to be upset about.
The outrage.
I mean, drive a car in Sydney, there's a lot of swearing goes on.
Yeah, true.
Yes, I do swear in the car, I would say that.
In front of your children?
No. Well, that's toned it down a bit, I would say. I wouldn't swear 5 times an hour.
I don't think so. I mean, when you're on loudspeaker with somebody and their kids are in the car or something like that, you do feel a little bit bad. I think kids are still an area where you got...
Actually, I wasn't...
Oh, right, yes. When the phone rings in the car, I always say hello to whoever's in the car.
Yeah, you're on speaker.
My kids are now 22 and 19.
So you're healthier, happier for your swearing, Greg.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And Claire, you've got a very pure life.
Of course.
But apparently not as genuine and sincere as Greg. Which means I'm not sure about this whole thing. But thank you very much, guys. Great to have you on. Fun as always. And great insights as well. Claire and Greg, thank you, guys.